Now, if you guys have ever read Isaiah, this type of stuff is everywhere. Okay? It's everywhere in Isaiah. And then if you guys will remember, the reason I wanted you to do this was because we talked about why it's so important. Like, I can be a prophet. I can prophesize with the best of them, actually. I will say that the Yankees will win a game.
Next game.
No, okay, now. So once again.
Starting to get details.
Right, so now, so anybody can be a prophet, right? But what really proves to other people you're a prophet?
It comes true.
It's the details, right? It's the details of what you give to people. We all are prophets. We all say stuff like, oh, I'm telling you what, my boy's going to screw up. And sure enough, eventually he does. You know, oh, there you go, I'm a prophet. No, you've got to give specific details. Like if I say the Yankees will win their next game, there will be 1 run scored in the first inning, 2 runs in the 5th, 3 runs in the 7th, and 1 in the bottom of the 9th on a walk-off homer to win it all. And that's exactly what happens. Now you're like, whoa, dude, that was pretty cool, right? But if I just say the Yankees are going to win another game, that's like, yeah, haha, duh.
50-50
you know.
there.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, eventually the Yankees will win another game. It might be this year, next year, or the following year. Sooner or later they will. Everybody knows that. Prophecies become prophecies because of the details of the prophecies. That's the most important part. If you look through Isaiah, you'll discover things like they cast lots for his robe or whatever, right? Now that's a very specific detail. And so if you're going to have those kind of details in the book of Isaiah, which you will find, and you're kind of going to have these kind of details in the book of Isaiah, which we do find, I think it's pretty specific that what they're talking about in Isaiah 53 is Jesus. This is one of the best talking points you can have with a Jew, by the way, because they don't think Jesus was God.
How many years before this all took place was it written?
Well, gee, thank you for setting me up. So, as was spoken about last week, this is why this is so important. This is why I gave you this homework, okay? When they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, are you all familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yes.
Raise your hand if you are not familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's kind of, sort of, not sure? Okay, here we go. Here we go, real quick. Little boy, herding sheep, walks along, taking rocks, throwing rocks and stuff, and he picks up a rock and he throws it into a cave, and he hears a smash. And he's like, what was that? Right? So he sticks his head in the cave, and he finds out he smashed like this old vase type thing, okay? Well, they start doing more research into this, and inside these vases are scrolls. And as they start to pull the scrolls back, they find out that they're books of the Old Testament on these scrolls, in these vases that this kid just accidentally found throwing rocks into a cave type thing.
In
right?
1943, right?
43. So as they excavated it, it took them probably a good they're still finding some now. Just recently they found yet another cave that happened to have some more scroll type stuff in it. But anyway, I'd say within 10 years they had basically excavated what they needed to in that area. And what they found in these vases in numerous little caves were what they refer to as the Dead Sea Scrolls. And when they took them apart, they found every book of the Old Testament in these Dead Sea Scrolls, save one. I think it was Esther. I think. So, anyway, they found the books of the Old Testament. One of those that they found was something called the Isaiah Scroll. The Isaiah Scroll was a complete copy of Isaiah, all laid out in the ancient Hebrew. And so what they decided to do was, well, let's date it. Let's just see what comes back. So they've now carbon dated this Isaiah scroll 4 different times, 4 different places, because sometimes you get contamination in certain parts. You know, if someone had it closer to a fire, and I won't get into it, but this side was closer to a fire. Sometimes you get a false reading or whatever. So they've used 4 different places on the Isaiah scroll, and the dates that they get when they do carbon dating, remember we talked about metric dating and carbon dating, they use carbon dating on it. When they do that, they come back with dates of at least 150 BC to somewhere to about 800 BC for that particular scroll. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say 150 BC. We'll use the best possible scenario. It's still 150 years prior to the event that happened, which was Jesus dying on the cross.
So all of Isaiah is clear-cut prophecy.
Ta-da. So if you've not read the book of Isaiah, read it. Take your time, go through it, and when you read something that's that is the crucifixion, that is all about the crucifixion, right? Then you'll know the science behind it. So we're using science, modern science, to prove that what we read in the Bible is actually true. Because I'll get this on the street. People will ask me, how do you know the Bible's true? It was written 2,000 years ago by men who are fallible. We weren't there when they wrote these books. We don't know if this happened. And what you'll hear is when you bring up stuff like Isaiah to anybody that's done their homework, from like a non-theist, you'll get things like, well, they wrote the book after the events. So the events happened, and then Isaiah was written afterwards, and that's how they got all the details in Isaiah of what happened. Oh, no, no, no. We have science proving now that it's been carbon dated 4 times, and it's at least 150 years prior to the events happening.
Does anybody dispute carbon dating?
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Sure people do. Sure people do. But I'm telling you this. When you're dealing with people that are non-theists, okay, who is their God? Science, nature, right. That's exactly right.
Themselves.
Yes. They don't believe that as a Christian that science and religion are compatible. They've been taught that science and religion are not compatible with one another. They're separate from one another. So when they talk to a Christian, they don't think you know anything about science. They don't think you believe in science. They don't think you trust science. So when you bring science to them, they have no choice but to believe you, because it's what their whole foundation is built on.
In the public school system.
Well, just everywhere. But non-theists have no choice but to ground their entire being in science. Think about that. There are no gods to them. No gods of any kind, right? So all they have is nature. All they have is science, and they ground it in science. So when you come to them with science, they have no choice but to accept it. They have to accept the science you're talking about. So do they kind of, fight about carbon dating? No. Actually, most non-theists will not fight about carbon dating because they trust the PhDs, and whatever they say goes. So they trust radiometric dating, they trust radiocarbon dating, they trust that when someone tells them the universe is 14 or 13.9 billion years old, they believe that. It's been changed, now it's 12.9 billion years. That just happened in the last couple months, by the way, just for your all knowledge. So if anybody says that the universe is 14 billion, you can go, no, it's just been changed, it's about 13 billion now. You look really smart. You look really smart. They just changed it. So, so when we talk to non-theists, we in the Christian community might say, yes, I don't agree with radiometric dating or radiocarbon dating, but the non-theists, no, they'll totally take it. They'll accept it. And it's a really good way to kind of have a conversation with them, because if they don't accept the science, you could be like, well, as a science denier, I don't know how I'm going to have a conversation with you. Well, they hate that, by the way.
But I'm curious, as a scientist, among the scientific world, is it pretty much accepted, as far as I always knew, it was pretty much accepted that the carbon dating was accurate,
Yes.
and it's still that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, it's,
Yeah, you don't have a lot of secular scientists arguing with themselves about carbon
I was
dating.
curious about.
They're not. They're not. Great.
Could a non-theist make the argument that since it's been proven that Isaiah was actually written, because we've got the scrolls to prove it, what's to say that somebody didn't write the New Testament based on what he read in Isaiah and just copy the story down off of that?
Well, so you're not destroying Isaiah as prophecy at this point. Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Yes, of
But
course.
you have to believe that what happened when Christ was on earth really happened in order for Isaiah to be a real prophecy.
Oh, so I think that's false.
What's that?
I don't think you have to believe that Jesus died on the cross to believe that Isaiah was a prophet.
No.
Okay.
Because, yeah, right.
It's yeah. I don't think you have to believe that Jesus died on the cross to believe that Isaiah was a prophet.
Well, but Isaiah, what Isaiah said had to have come true
Yes.
in order for these prophecies to be of any value.
But absolutely.
And so you have to believe that what was written in the New Testament was accurate in
Okay.
order for his prophecies to be.
So if the New Testament was not, it did not exist. If only the Old Testament existed, which, by the way, think about this, in history,
Well, to the Jew,
that was it.
That's the
There
way
was
it
a
still
point,
is.
think about that. 2,020 years ago, there was only the Old Testament. They didn't have the New Testament. That didn't exist. That only came about after Jesus. So think about that. So yeah, so you had these prophecies. By the way, what I'm showing you here is just Isaiah. It's gone now? Oh, I didn't plug it in. What I'm showing you here is just Isaiah. I want you to keep this in mind. So all I did was show you just one book, Isaiah, and I showed you one passage, right? However, there are literally, and I'm not kidding, there are thousands of prophecies in the Old Testament that have now come true and are revealed to us in the New Testament, by the way.
Well,
So
the
just an
earthquake
FYI.
and the eclipse were prophesied.
Yes, yeah. So if you read, once again, if you guys read Isaiah, you'll be blown away at the number of references to the crucifixion. It wasn't just Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53 is just cool because it's all compact. But if you read Isaiah, and I highly recommend you do, you're going to find all kinds of references. And it's these details of the references that then help us. So once we carbon date the book of Isaiah, this is how we know, this is how we can know that Christianity has more to it than any other religion out there. When you start comparing religions and holy books like the Quran and the Book of Mormon and some of the other holy books out there, this is the litmus test. If you go through the Book of Mormon and you look for prophecies, you'll find them. There's a ton of prophecies that are in there that were made by Joseph Smith, right? And almost all of them, if not all of them, never came true. They were all false. They were all completely wrong. So it can't be inspired by God if you get the prophecies wrong. There was like one, I think, made in the Quran, and it had to do with the conquest of a city. That was supposed to happen like 900 years after this particular point. Well, this point happened in 900 years. The conquest of that city never happened, and still has not happened to this day. So, yes.
Something about what Craig said, saying that couldn't somebody claim that the New Testament was simply written to copy and falsely fulfill prophecy? But you think, we talked about this in our Bible study the other day, how many people died to defend what they knew that they saw
Yeah.
in the New Testament? You know, nobody's going to be tortured and die for something they know is a lie.
In our apologetics class, by the way, Craig, we just covered the New Testament. And one of the things that's done by historians is they like to get information that happened as near to the event as possible. Then there's no time for mythology and stuff to creep in, you know? And so if you can get a story that was 300 years after the event, well, I guess we can kind of believe it, but 300 years is a lot of time for events to have changed because it's a telephone game. I tell you, you tell her, she tells him, he tells. Before long, the story's not quite the same as the original story, right? We've all been there?
Not even close, is it?
Not even close, right? We can trace, and I've got a series on this, but we can trace the New Testament back to having the first book of it, Mark, having been written right around 40 to 45 AD. When did Jesus die? 30 to 33. Jesus died right around 30 to 33 AD, and the first book written about it was Mark. And that was right around that 40 to 45 AD, well within one generation of all of those events having happened. Historians, whether they believe or don't believe, atheist or Christian, doesn't matter. Historians do not dispute that Jesus was a man and that Jesus walked the earth. They disagree of whether or not he was God, and they disagree with miracles and such, but they do not disagree that there was a man named Jesus who walked this earth and suffered the types of things he suffered, because we even have extra biblical. Everybody's like, well, the Bible proves the Bible, right? Type of thing. I hear this on the street all the time. Well, yeah, you read about Jesus, but only in the Bible. Not true. There are many extra biblical sources that reference Jesus, and one of them is Josephus. He's very popular. He was a Jewish historian. And he just kind of mentions Jesus in passing. He was this guy that was followed by these disciple guys and blah, blah, blah. But Josephus, who's not in the Bible, not mentioned in the Bible, not a book of the Bible, is this extra biblical book, and he references Jesus. You have Pliny the Younger, and he references Jesus. And you have all these other people that have referenced Jesus that are not books of the Bible. So we have very good reason to believe that Jesus lived, died, was a man, walked the earth. It's just always in dispute over whether or not.
And to be mentioned by those people, there was lots of people back then that had cults and followings and, you know, so for one person to be singled out as like, yeah, that guy's way different than all these other hundreds that started their own church.
And I think it was in Luke, even after Jesus died, he came back. Most people don't know this, by the way, but after Jesus died, we all know he rose again, right? He stuck around how long? 40 days. Jesus was back on earth for 40 days, and not as a spirit, like as a person. Like he walked around going, no, listen, look, I've got holes in my hand, check it out. Like he showed them.
They could still walk through a wall.
Well, that's true, well, he's still God, but he appeared to them as a person. Right? Yeah. So he still appeared to them as a person. I believe it's the book of Luke. I would have to verify this, but in one of them, I think it's Luke, who's questioned. You know, do you believe, did you really believe that he rose from the dead? And he says to him, listen, you don't have to take my word for it. There's 500 other people down there that saw him as well. If you don't believe me, go ask them. Most of them are still alive. That's what's referenced in the New Testament. So he's like, dude, you don't have to believe me. I don't care. I'm telling you what I saw. I don't know if you believe it, and if you don't, that's fine. There were 500 other people that saw him, and most of them are still alive. Go talk to them. They'll tell you. They'll give you the same story. So you can tell they weren't trying to hide anything. So anyway, very interesting. So your homework was Isaiah, Isaiah scroll, Dead Sea Scrolls, carbon dated, 150 to 800 years BC. So 150 years prior to the events happening. All of these details are revealed in just Isaiah 53, but if you read the rest of Isaiah, you'll be like, oh, no way! Like, some of this stuff is like, you know, like the casting of lots, right? Like, how do you, one of the arguments is, well, they set it up so that Jesus would fulfill this prophecy. Like, they had him ride in on the back of a donkey on purpose, because that's what the Old Testament said he would do. So they put him on the back, and had him ride in on purpose so that he would look like he was fulfilling prophecy. He wasn't really fulfilling prophecy. They were making it come true. But then you read the details and you're like, what do you talk to the Romans and say, hey, you need to cast lots for his robe because we need to make this look really good, right? The disciples are all, hey, no, make this look legit, right? Like the Roman guards would care about when somebody like, dude, no, you know? So anyway. It's crazy the lengths they'll go to just to avoid the fact that Isaiah really was a prophet and he really was inspired by God, and these words were really written long prior to the events ever happening. So
wasn't there also a Russian or Roman enemy that wrote a bunch of the books about it?
I would not be aware of who you are speaking of there.
I thought we heard that.
Maybe. Pastor Scott's a pretty smart guy. I like him. All right, so we're going to continue on, and this is the point where we have the pop quiz. So you guys know that it's not just about showing up, right? I don't care to hear myself talk. I already know this. I already know all this stuff, right? I show up to hopefully leave something with you guys. I want you to learn something from this. And so in order to do that, for me, it's repetition. I need to hear it again and again and again. And being quizzed on it helps bury it so I don't forget it, because this will become important as we move down the road. So we're going to have a little bit of a pop quiz. We're going to blow through this stuff, but I want you guys to just kind of work with me here, and hopefully it'll help kind of bury some of this. If you weren't here for any of the preceding ones or have only been kind of sporadically, some of this stuff will be new, but we'll just play along because some people have been here every time, and so we'll have to ask them some of the questions. So there were two types of science that we talked about. Can you give me the two types? Do you guys remember any of this?
Yes.
You kids, you kids.
About one.
Which one?
Historical.
Okay, very good. Do you remember the other one? What was the other one? It was, because I'm gonna ask another follow-up question to the next one, and I'm gonna say it was three things. Do you remember? It was empirical. So historical and empirical, right? And empirical was three things. What were the three things? You're cheating, you're reading from your notes.
Of course I am.
But does anybody just know? Does anybody just know?
Observable, repeatable, falsifiable.
And testable, right? What did you know? Which one did you know? Repeatable, very good. Okay, so you're learning. So the three things are testable, observable, repeatable, right? This was the slide that I gave for that one, right? Testable, observable, and repeatable. What's this an example of? Which type of science?
Historical.
Empirical.
Empirical science. It's empirical science because it is, right? And this is what we find in our school books. This is actually a page taken from page 462 of the biology book used at Central High School. And they talk about exactly the examples. They're talking about the different grasshoppers and which ones are chosen. So this is a direct example. This is an empirical example. Do we as creationists dispute this kind of evolution?
No.
No, we do not, right? This is fine. If this is what you want to call evolution, we can call that, I don't care what you call it peanut butter and jelly. I don't care, right? If this was what you want to call evolution, I'll call it that all day long and we'll be fine. There's no argument here, okay? How about this? Historical, right? Now, Norman brought this up to me last week, and he mentioned that it's also called forensic, if you will. I don't like to use forensic because when we do forensic, everybody thinks, everybody thinks like dead bodies, right? We all think crime scenes and that kind of stuff. But it's good to think that, and the reason it's okay to think forensic is because this is how they go about trying to prove one thing became another. So once again, this is the story of the evolution of a whale. This is pulled right from the biology textbook. This is straight from the biology textbook at Central High School. They talk about this, okay? And it was either a dog, a Pakicetus, and or there were two other things they thought it might have evolved. Do you remember what they were? Yep, and what was the other one? And the hippo, right? A cow or a hippo or a dog or something evolved into a whale. This is what I would call historical science. It happened in history. We can't observe this. It's not testable, it's not observable, and it's certainly not repeatable, right? So this is the kind of evolution we would dispute. We'd be like, well, this is where the problem comes in. I don't agree with this kind of evolution. So this is what we're always on guard for, right? We don't care if they're talking about empirical stuff. We only really care if they're talking about historical stuff. Norman brought up forensic science. And forensic science is just what they use to kind of figure out how this may have become that type of a thing. They do the same type of stuff. They look at DNA, they look at bones, they look at similarities. These are supposed transitionals, blah, 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 that lead to one another. There's lots of, these are of course fraught with problems because they don't have full skeletons. Even so, the evolutionists would have to prove that something like this could even become that, and we've never observed it. It's all taken on faith. They just assume that a dog can even become this next thing here that they have in the list. They just assume that.
Is that why they use the word theory so much?
Well, theory, we talked about that a little bit. I think it should be called a hypothesis, right? We talked about how it should be downgraded to a hypothesis, but they won't do that. They'll continue to call it a theory.
No, what they say now is it's been decided. Evolution is a fact.
It's a fact. And they're right. Did you guys, now hold on, you guys are gonna hate me for this. Like your eyes just got really bad, really big. So, evolution is a fact, okay? And I want to explain to you what I mean by that. I'm not kidding. Evolution is a fact. If this is the kind of evolution you're talking about, this is a fact. Certain grasshoppers typically get eaten more often in certain environments than other grasshoppers. Okay, this is a fact, right? And so when somebody says evolution is a fact, it's a fact, you should have them define, well, what do you mean by evolution? That's the question. If this is what they mean, No, no, it's not. No, it's not. This is not a fact. This is a fact. And I'll give them that. If you want to call this evolution as a fact, if this is what you, I'll give you that. Because it's testable, observable, repeatable. We can all do it. But this, no, stop it. Just, no, that's a religion. Now, if this kind of evolution is a fact, now we've left the world of science, we've entered the world of philosophy, and now we're talking about a religion. This is all taken by faith. And then, no, we got science, we got science. Yeah, but when you look at it, it's all in how you interpret the science. For instance, I'll give you one good example since we're here. The reason they think that this Pakicetus became a whale is because in the whale they find two bones near the back of the whale, okay? And they come down. Now the evolutionist has decided that those bones were once the legs, the hind legs of this animal here. And because this animal didn't need those hind legs anymore, they still exist in the whale, they're just not used in any capacity. Okay? So they have these whales have, I tease my friend about it, I'm like, oh, whales have legs. Well, that's very scientific. Whales have legs. I tease them about that all the time. So anyway, they do believe that there are something, they're called vestigial organs, which means they once belonged to something else, but now they're useless in the current creature that they are in. Like our appendix is apparently a vestigial organ, right?
So-
Of course, now we're finding that,
Not so at all.
right, so now we're finding that the appendix actually has a function for the human body, and now
It's the
they're like,
warehouse,
well,
it's a warehouse for bacteria. After
Correct.
you get dysentery, it
That's
repopulates your gut with
that's
bacteria.
exactly right. But for years, we were taught that the appendix can be taken out, and the reason it can be taken out is because it's not used for anything. It's a vestigial organ. And this idea of vestigial organs is what's led to things like you can take this out and you can take that out and you'll be fine, right? And we're finding it has a function. So the hind legs in this whale, they say, came from the hind, are just remnants. They're leftovers from the hind legs of this Pakicetus animal. But now what we know is that the bones that are in this whale, they're used for reproduction. Okay? And it's, I'll use very broad verbiage here, because we're all adults, right? But it is used to keep certain things in place during certain actions. Use your imagination. And we know that's why they're there, right? They need something, they're underwater. They're in the water, right? And they've got to keep certain things in place while they procreate. And so that's what these two bones are used for, and we know that's what they're still used for. So they were created there for a reason, right? If you ask somebody that's a non-theist, though, he'll say, well, no, they just now serve a different purpose. At one point in time, they served, yes, right? Yeah, the monster. Oh, the evolution monster, just eating everything. Nom, 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 nom. That's okay. We can absorb that. We'll take that. So what they'll tell you is that once upon a time they were used as the hind legs for this, but now they're used in reproduction. They're still vestigial. They're still a remnant.
Just like our hair.
So even when you falsify it, like even when like this is vestigial and you're like, no, the bones we now know are used for this particular purpose, they're like, instead of being falsified, remember I said science has to be falsifiable, instead of being falsified, they're like, no, it's just used for something different nowadays. We'll just keep eating that evidence. Do you see how it's impossible? You cannot falsify evolution anymore. They've made it impossible to falsify evolution. They just keep eating the monster. One of the things they had, I'll give you one more example. One of the things they had was they had the porpoises, right? And they use sonar, right? Echolocation, correct? That's how they find their food, right? Well, here's the problem. You've got a porpoise over here that has echolocation, and you have a bat that has echolocation. In the evolutionary world, the dolphin or the porpoise would have to be evolved from the bat somehow, or the bat has to be evolved from the porpoise somehow. It would be the porpoise evolved from the bat, because you remember how we came out of the water, turned to mammals, and we had to get mammals back into the water type thing. So you would have to somehow, in evolutionary terms, try to find a way to get the porpoise to have evolved from a bat, because they both have echolocation. And they use the exact same genes to perform this echolocation. So it all fits, right? The problem is, come on, a porpoise didn't evolve from it, that's not how it worked. So now they have a conundrum. So what did they do? They invented a new term. It's called convergent evolution. And what that means is not only did evolution find a way to evolve echolocation in this organism over here, but it also found a way to evolve echolocation in this organism over here.
And they can't call it God.
No, they can't, because their God is nature. So nature has to be the answer to this question. So you have a problem. Echolocation, echolocation. Two completely different monsters living in two completely different environments. So what they do is they come up with new terms. Now they call it convergent evolution. So that just means that this thing evolved echolocation and this thing evolved echolocation in different ways, in different environments, in different places, right? Monster, just eat it. Oh, just eat it all, right? Convergent evolution.
How did they determine to call it something else?
Convergent evolution?
Yeah.
Well, they had
You
to
said that one person.
Win an argument.
win an argument, yeah.
Like they made that picture, they just drew it.
They just drew it, yeah,
And-
it's true.
And sound travels 25 times faster in water than in air. So you got an animal that has to do all this math to figure out how far away that thing is. I mean, it's.
In different ways. When you look at the complexity of it, it's pretty obvious it was created, but in an evolutionary sense, it has to be nature, period, can't be God, because no gods exist. That's their starting point. No gods of any kind exist, but do you think there might be? Nope.
No.
Do you think it's possible? No. Is there any chance in the world that there might be a God? No. No chance in the world. So they've actually put themselves in a box, which is funny, because they'll always claim that, they're the bright ones, they're the ones, right? And they're very close-minded. Like, they refuse to look outside the box at a potential that there might be God, where we are like, okay, let's look at nature. Can nature do this? And if nature can't, we're open-minded and free thinkers to the point where we'll go, okay, maybe God did do this. Let's look into a supernatural explanation for this. They won't. Only a natural explanation. What about supernatural? No supernatural, only natural. But maybe supernatural? No, not even maybe, only super. They're very close-minded, they're not free thinkers. So it's very ironic when you talk to them. They always think they're above you in terms of intellect and stuff, and the truth is they're very close-minded. They won't even give a supernatural origin a shot, right? So anyway, so we have this situation here. So we talked about kind of convergent evolution. You guys kind of understand how we keep eating, the monster just keeps eating, right? All right, two types of information. What were they?
Fact and fiction.
Not really. Oh, what'd you say? Yes, and what was the other one? Specified information. Thank you. Yes. So we had Shannon information and specified information. Don't forget these terms. These are actual terms, okay, to describe the different kinds of information. Shannon information and specified information. Here's the difference. Shannon information on the top, specified information on the bottom. On the top, you have recognizable capital English letters. Shannon information has no context, it has no meaning. Just like these. Specified information gives us an actual context. It gives us meaning, right? And where do we find specified information? In DNA, right? This is where we find specified information. So DNA is made up of not 26 letters in the English alphabet, it's made up of 4 letters. What are those 4 letters?
C, G, G, and A.
Good. Does anybody else remember? You're gritting your teeth. ACTG, very good. So A for adenine, cytosine, thymine, and guanine. These are the 4 letters that make up DNA. Bonus question, what does DNA stand for?
Nucleic acid.
Very good.
Wait.
Deoxyribonucleic acid.
You got about 6 people answering you. I didn't
I
understand any of
know,
it.
I'm not sure any of them are right, but whatever. I'll just give it to them. Everybody gets a star.
All right.
Oh, I participated.
Yeah, I know.
That word in words with a bunch of letters that don't say anything. So what is that
Deoxy.
word?
What's that?
What is that
Oh,
word?
deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid. That's what DNA actually stands for. So just say that.
Yeah,
All right, right, so A, C, T, and G, those are the letters that make up the specified information that's in DNA, right? And here is an example of the specified information, A, C, T, and G. Remember T, what do we use? TCG was like serine, and TAG was a stop codon, and TGG is tryptophan. So you can see that the way you put these things together, oh, you put 3 nucleotides together, what do you get?
Hold on.
You get a codon, right? That's a bonus question. So you have to put 3 of these together and it'll give you an actual product, if you will. So TCG gives you one thing, TAG gives you something else, TGG gives you something else, CTT, CCT, blah, 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 and on. So you mix these things up in 3s and you'll get different products depending on how you do it. You'll also get no product. Sometimes you can put these 3 things together and you won't always get a product, right? So once again, even DNA has Shannon information and specified information, just like our alphabet does. And where does specified information come from? In the world around us, what do we know? Give me an example of specified information. Any example.
Computer code.
Computer code, beautiful. Computer code is specified information. What else is specified information? Language is specified information. Thank you. Unless you're talking to your kids, then it's Shannon for them and specified for you. Right? So how about books? Books give us specified information. Now, computer code and language and books. What? Now let's break those down. Think a little deeper. Break those down a little deeper, and what's at the foundation of all of those? A creator, keep going. A creator's right. An author, keep going. Intellect, yes. Intelligence, right?
Knowledge.
At the bottom of it all, there has to be an intelligence behind it. Do you ever walk on the beach and the waves have written something in the thing?
No.
Right. No, that's never happened in the history of ever, right? That's not how it works. If you see something written in the sand, do you automatically, wow, the waves are smart. This looks like a really smart beach. I like the smart beach. Look at what it wrote. No, you figure that somebody was there and wrote that in the sand, right? Obviously. So, why can't we in the world around us recognize that when we see specified information, it always leads back to an intelligence? So why can't we in today's world, when we see specified information, why are we not allowed to just go ahead and follow the truth where it leads? The specified information in DNA takes us back to an intelligence.
That means we're not in charge anymore.
Well, for some, you're right. That's exactly right.
Some of us won't
Greg Comfort says atheists can't find God for the same reason a criminal can't find a cop.
Yes. Yeah, it's very true.
And you think about radio astronomers, which dedicate their entire life, the government funds them
Yeah.
to search for specified radio information coming from outer space.
Yep. They're constantly looking for the bloop, 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 bloop. You've seen the movies, right, where they finally get a pattern that comes back to them. And they're like, that's a recognizable pattern, and it's the same thing over and over again. There must be an intelligence on the other side of that bloop, 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 bloop that's coming back to us.
So flip that around in your head. So they're saying that if they recognize specified information coming from outer space, it equals an intelligence.
Right.
Put the specified information under their own feet is random chance over time.
Thank you.
Yes.
Right. And
I mean,
the reason, and
it's
now,
so hypocritical and ridiculous.
it is hypocritical, but why will they take his direction and not the other direction? Because it leads to a naturalistic source. Do you see the difference? There's aliens out there. We got to find the aliens. And it's okay to do that in a non-theistic world because you're ultimately looking for something that's natural in origin. Do you see the problem? When you look for something you have to go to a supernatural origin. And they don't like the supernatural idea. They only like the natural idea. So chasing what they think might be aliens is fine with them because you're going to ultimately come to a natural cause of that signal that you're getting. But when you see this, just as Mike brought up, when they see this in the genome, and they know it can't be humans that put it there, then they refuse to look at something supernatural, an intelligence that's supernatural. They won't look at that. So this is the hypocrisy that you'll find within the community if you ever have a conversation with anybody. But this points straight to an intelligence. And not because Brian is a Christian and thinks God exists. I can be an atheist and see the truth in this. This is specified information. Specified information only comes from an intelligence. If there's specified information in our DNA, it only makes sense that it came from an intelligence. Period. Now they can claim that the intelligence was aliens. Right? And they do. They do. They'll claim that some aliens came to Earth and we're just a giant experiment, really.
Sure.
Aliens came and they put the life here, and the life has grown into what it is today, right? But what they're doing is nothing more than kicking the can down the road, because if this is question begging, what's the question? Where did the aliens come from? Right? We're back to square one with the aliens. And other aliens. Well, where did they come from? And then it's turtles all the way down. Right? So do you guys see the problem with the naturalistic explanation for specified information in DNA? It's much more likely that there's a supernatural explanation for that. Okay? So, DNA, how do the different letters combine? What combines to what? Do you guys remember?
G and C and T and A.
Equal, but how? Like, the four letters combine how? How do they combine?
G and
You had it right. Yes, yes, yes. A to T, C to G. Do you remember how I showed you this? This is the DNA double helix, and when it's unwoven, this is what it looks like. It looks like railroad tracks, right? Do you remember how we built this? And do you remember what my example was for this? Like what I was showing you at the time that I showed you this? What was the thing?
Mistake.
It was, yeah, mistakes. You're right. What was it? It was called something. There was a process that I was referring to here. Do you guys remember what it was?
Mutation.
What was that?
Mutation.
No, not mutation. Oh yeah, well, it did show mutations, but I'm talking about the process that fixes the mutations. Error correction, right? DNA error correction. So what do you remember? There were two things I mentioned about DNA error correction that really blows this out of the water. We talked about specified information in DNA, and now we're going to talk about within DNA, there's a process called DNA error correction that fixes the errors, right? There were two things that it did, and I just gave you one. I just said it. So DNA error correction does two things that really helps us infer that there's an intelligence behind it all.
well, it fixes the error.
Very good, it fixes the error, right? But so now in order to fix the error, it first has to recognize the error, right? So DNA error correction can do two things: detect what is and isn't an error, and it knows how to fix that error. Now in the world around us, what can detect an error? Intelligence can detect an error, right? Remember my example of I want to thank Pastor Craig for, and then I made all those mistakes, right? So you identify, right? And what knows how to fix the error? Intelligence, same answer, right? Intelligence knows what an error is and isn't. It also knows how to fix those errors. But it requires an intelligence. You can't put a book a book that has tons of mistakes in front of even an ape and expect the ape to go, that's wrong, and that's wrong, and that's wrong. And they're supposed to be pretty intelligent creatures, and for the most part, they kind of are. I mean, they're pretty smart, right? But you still need a higher intelligence to do these two things. It's not enough to have intelligence. You need a higher intelligence to do these two things. But there's a process within your genome that is doing this right now called DNA error correction. Remember the video we showed? Yeah. So, once again, this infers an intelligence behind what's in our DNA. Not only does the DNA itself infer an intelligence, but so does the processes within, right? And then keep going with it. Like how does your body just know what is and isn't waste? How does it know what's good for you and what's bad for you? How does it just know how to purge what's bad for you? You get food poisoning, if it didn't know that the whatever was bad, like the salmonella or the E. coli or whatever it was in the food was bad for you, then it would just keep processing it and it would kill you, right? But your body just seems to know that this particular thing is bad. And how do we purge that? Well, there's different ways we can do that. You all know how it happens, but your body knows how to purge it and which direction to send it, up or down. Correct? It knows how to flush it. Your body knows all kinds of things that we just take for granted. We don't stop to think about this, right? Think about the development of a baby. In the womb, there are certain enzymes or certain proteins or certain signals that are sent that say, okay, start building this within the baby. You know why? Because it's bad if the bones are built outside the skin. It's bad if the veins are put outside the skin. Think about this. It has to know, there's a blueprint, there's an instruction manual for building a baby. Want to talk about the miracle of a child? Think about it deeper. From the time two cells meet, the information is now there to build a human being. And it just somehow knows between these two cells how to start building that human being. It has to start building the body. It has to start building the bone structure. It has to build the veins. It has to build the organs. It has to build the brain. It has to build the skin. It has to build it in a certain order. If you get it out of order, the organism dies. It has to build the immune system. It has to build the neurons in your brain, and it has to trigger the neurons to start firing. Think about that for a second. How ridiculously complex is that from two cells, right? And as you continue to build, more things are added in. Think about this. There's a trigger for starting finger production. But it's not enough to just trigger finger production. It has to know where to make the fingers in the first place. It has to know that they are fingers. It has to trigger when to start building the fingers within the process. And it has to know when to stop building the fingers in the process. There has to be a point in the instructions where it says stop building the fingers. Otherwise, they just continue to get super long, right? They would never stop growing.
Never mentioned the thumb.
Everything, right? There's a point in the process of building the human that everything is triggered, and it has to be done in a particular order, in a particular way, in a certain style. And when you start with two little teeny tiny cells, you end up with us. That's what you get. How incredible is that? You have to build bone marrow. You have to build osteocytes, which are bone cells. You have to build, you have to build. I could do this all night long. Think about how complex. So when we talk about, oh, that little baby's such a miracle, we just say it, right? We just say it and it just becomes commonplace. No. Understand the science behind it. It is a miracle that we start with two little teeny tiny cells and get what we see today. It happens all the time, every minute of every hour. Somebody's having a new baby. But stop taking it for granted. The fact that it all works the way it does. And if any one of those things goes wrong, something happens to the child. They end up with 4 fingers instead of 5 fingers. They end up with 6 fingers instead of 5 fingers. They end up with Down syndrome. They end up with all kinds of complications, right? If any one of those instructions goes bad, if there's a mistake made at any point along the way, something happens to that organism. It's incredible that anything ever makes it out of the womb. Let's be honest, right? It's incredible. So the miracle of God, don't take it for granted. The science behind it is mind-blowing when you just stop and think about how a baby's actually created within the womb itself and how it's fed, and then it's not fed, and then it's ready to be out in the world. And you just cut this cord and all of a sudden it just breathes air and eats food. Are you kidding me? How does it do all of that? All of the instructions have to be there at the right time, in the right place, in the right order for that to happen. Darwin said in his book, and this is quoted all the time, this is quoted a lot by creationists, but I'm going to take it one step further tonight because there's something they don't show you that I'm going to. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications my theory would absolutely break down. This is in his Origin of Species. This is in his book. He admits this. Darwin wasn't an idiot. I mean, he understood if something could be shown, my theory could be falsified, is what he's saying here. You can falsify my theory if you can show this. And this is what creationists always point to. You'll see this in a lot of presentations and stuff. Here's what they usually don't show you, and that's the last line. The last line is this: but I can find no such case.
We didn't even know there was a cell.
Thank you! Mike nailed it. So here's the truth. Darwin was honest. He was right on when he said this. This is true. But it's only true in Darwin's day. This was true of the science at the time in Darwin's day because the smallest piece that they knew of was a little blood cell, and it was like a blob of plasma, like you drop jelly on a counter. That's kind of what they knew as the smallest unit in the human body at the time. So to him, sure, you could build that from scratch. It's just gunk, is whatever. You could find that sometime somewhere.
Goo in them.
Everything has goo in it, right? Lots of goo everywhere. So yeah, coming up with the goo wouldn't be a problem. So this is true of Darwin in Darwin's day, but we know so much more now, right? The 1950s, when Crick and Watson discovered the DNA double
Excuse me,
helix.
it's like we got a rainbow in our lake.
What?
Yes, it is.
Shut up.
It comes into play.
Somebody take a picture of
Yeah,
that.
somebody
Take a picture of that.
somebody dive in. Somebody dive in and get the pot of gold. I just
Bet if you dove in there deep enough, you'd find a parking lot.
It confirms what we all know. The place is blessed. This church is blessed.
No, I said if you went in.
Very nice. Oh, that's so cool. Very cool. Good point, Craig.
That is cool.
That's intelligent.
That is so awesome.
So when Crick and Watson discovered the double helix back in 1950-ish, that was the beginning of the end of Darwinian evolution as we do it. It just ushered in a whole new idea. We now know that look, we've got specified information in the DNA, you've got specified information in the DNA error correction, the list goes on and on and on and on. We know now that Darwinian evolution is not true. That is not how it happened. Darwinian evolution, as it's stated, is impossible. It's not improbable, it's not, oh, maybe, no.
Are the schools
It's
teaching
impossible.
that yet?
Of course they are. Yeah, of course they are. So,
Your
Yeah.
Cambrian, pre-Cambrian doesn't work for that either.
it works perfectly for that.
I mean,
What do you mean?
it negates what he said.
Oh, yeah, correct, that's exactly right, yes. So, in the case of Darwin, and this, when you see this quote, recognize it for what it is. It was true at the time Darwin said it, but we know so much more now. Science is, it's moved on. It's moved on. It's time to get with the times. What are the lowest two layers of the fossil record? Anybody remember?
Cambrian, pre-Cambrian.
Very good. Precambrian and Cambrian, right? So here's a list of the Precambrian, Cambrian. Down here are the two layers we're talking about. And one of the things that it was built on are these transitionals, right? Transitionals are, this kind of looks like this and kind of looks like that, but it isn't that and it isn't this. That's what a transitional basically is. Things that have a lot of the same types of things but aren't quite the same, right?
Which Darwin is describing.
Which is exactly what Darwin is describing in this example right here. He's talking about slight modifications reaching from one to another, okay? So transitions was the big thing we talked about concerning the Cambrian and Precambrian. This is fauna, F-A-U-N-A. This is fauna from the Precambrian days. Notice the three types. You have these leafy things, you have jellyfish, and these little amoeba type things like worms, kind of like worms, right? Those were really the three types of, we talked about body plans. Does anybody remember the scientific name for body plans? We've got like species, and it's all part of that history. Does anybody remember? It's called phyla, P-H-Y-L-A. P-H-Y-L-A, phyla. Phyla are different body plans, right? So you have three different types of body plans represented here. You have the jellyfish, you have these leafy things, and then worms. Think of worms, right? Those are three completely different body plans. However, when you move to the Cambrian, you get something called, do you remember what it was called? There was an event that happened back then. Do you remember? Yes. What was it called?
Cambrian explosion.
The Cambrian explosion. You guys remember this?
Didn't happen.
So the Cambrian explosion, there was an explosion of things, and this one of the things that came, one of the different body plans that came from this were these little items here. Do you remember what these are called? Anybody? Trilobites, right? You can find these everywhere. You can see them at all the natural history museums. There's some of them are huge. They're like huge. They're really cool. If you can find the really big ones, they're super cool. Anyway, they had all kinds of different stuff. So remember what we were looking at here: jellyfish, leaves, and worms. And now we have organisms that have hard bodies, digestive system, mouth, anus, legs, brain, stomach. Not just eyes, but complex eyes. They look like the eyes you see on a fly, right? They already existed in this Cambrian rock layer. And they come out of nowhere, like literally, poof, there they are. There's no transitions that lead from these things to these things, right? They just all of a sudden appear as if out of nowhere. Now, is this what evolution would predict?
No.
No, you would expect to find a bunch of transitions leading up to these types of things, right? And it's not just this one body plan. There's 20 different new body plans that just appear in the Cambrian rocks that don't look like any of these things. None of them. 20 new body plans that just appear in the Cambrian explosion. Hence the name explosion, right? I don't know if I told you guys this, but it wasn't just animals that happened. Later on in the rock layer, you find plant explosions, where certain types of plants just all of a sudden appear out of nowhere in the fossil record, and they weren't below that. And you get flowering plants, like plants that actually bring forth flowers. Think about this. We always talk about animals and organisms, but flowers, same thing. So flowers that bring forth flowers and such, okay? Nothing in the rock layer. There's nothing leading up to them. They just kind of poof. It's a plant explosion that no one ever talks about, but they call it a plant explosion. You can find it in the scientific literature if you ever look it up. But anyway, you get all of these things that pop up. So in a Darwinian style, where everything's supposed to evolve from one into another through these random, successive types of motions, do you think?
It doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit, right? It doesn't fit, right? What does this fit? Creation. This is a beautiful example of creation, right? And we find a really good story about how all of these things appear where? Genesis. Right in Genesis, right? When God creates all of the animals of the oceans, right?
Yep.
Okay, this is exactly what we would expect. In one day, God spoke it all into existence. And all of a sudden, you find all of these new organisms, right? Well, guess what we find in the fossil record? Exactly what the Bible reveals to us. This is exactly what Genesis is talking about. A sudden explosion of new organisms. And that's what we find in the fossil record. So it doesn't fit evolution. Not at all. It doesn't fit Darwinian evolution at all. But it fits the Bible perfectly. So, another beautiful example of how the Bible's revealed. So we've talked about Isaiah, we've talked about prophecies, we've talked about carbon dating of the Isaiah scroll, we've talked about intelligent design, we've talked about intelligence within the genome, we've talked about intelligence within DNA error correction, right? And we've talked about intelligence, or we've talked about sudden random events happening within the fossil record itself, which is what Genesis reveals to us.
You have one of those.
I have tons of those, and I'm going to bring them.
I thought you were.
I'm going to bring them. I keep thinking I'm going to bring them. I forget to put them in my backpack, but I will bring them one of these weeks, and I'll pass them around so you guys can look at them. One of them's super good. Like, it shows the eyes really well. So you might have to, it's kind of dark in here, but if you guys kind of use your phone and put a flashlight on it, you can see the eyes really, really well. It's a beautiful. Anywhere. There's a rock shop in Custer. There's a rock shop in Hill City. You can go see them if you want to at the South Dakota School of Mines, Natural History Museum there that they
You can
have.
actually purchase some.
You can buy some. You can go on eBay and pick them up all day
You
long.
might even
They're-
be able to buy them on wall drug.
Oh.
Wall drug, maybe wall drug. There's literally tens of thousands of these things for sale on eBay.
What do they call them
trilobites, TRI.
There's a guy at the mall, where the old Sears is, they got a bunch of shops.
Yeah.
He has fossils for sale.
Trilobites, there you go.
Weekends only. Okay.
Yep. You can find them everywhere. Yeah, you can go out on eBay, and the better the specimen, the more expensive, but you can pick one up. I think the one that I'm gonna bring, I've got a couple of specimens that were probably $80, $100, something like that. But they're really good specimens, right? They're beautiful specimens. Oh, they're about that big. And one of them's probably about this big. It's in a matrix about that big, which is a rock, like a rock about that big. So yeah, they're really super cool. So anyway, a beautiful example. I put it on my shelf, and people are always like, what is that? That is so pretty. Because it's really cool, right? It's just very different. And that opens up conversations for me. I'm like, well, gee, I'm glad you asked. That's a trilobite. Do you know why I have it? Well, no, tell me about it. Okay, I'll tell you about it. And then we talk about how it confirms Genesis, right? And I have yet to meet somebody that wasn't like, that's really cool. I've never heard that before. So trilobites are a beautiful example of God's creation. It confirms Genesis. It's just, it's great. I use it all the time in my talks. Kids love it. So, lots of evidence here. What are these? Gears. These are gears, right? This is like a blown up microscopic view of gears. You totally nailed it, man. You got one. Yeah. It's not. It's not. So these are gears, right? Just kind of a close-up, right? A very close-up, right? But, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious these are gears, right? They're not gears. They belong to something called the plant hopper. This is an insect that has these on its hind legs. And it's what propels them through the air. This little plant hopper uses these things to spring forward, right? And this is what's on his back legs. Life science creature with interlocking gears on legs discovered. That is on an organism. There's a bug that has those in his rear legs. And if they were not exactly geared precisely right, he would jump right, he would jump left, he would jump backwards. They have to be precisely configured in order to get this organism to spring forward. But this is what you'll find on the back legs of a plant hopper. This is what's in the world around us. If you just look around, you can see God's creation everywhere, right?
When you were going through the development of a baby,
Yeah.
I started thinking about how complex pollination is. Because that involves
Right.
things from the different kingdoms, plant and animal.
Yep. And
And also, it depends on the environment.
right.
The wind, and it also depends on the astronomical environment for the seasons and everything. And all those things have to be just right, or pollination does not occur.
That's exactly right. So what he's talking about is something called a symbiotic relationship, right? Have you kids ever seen Venom? You ever watched the movie Venom?
Yeah.
Okay, you know how he's a symbiote,
Yeah.
right?
I think so.
Right, it's a symbiotic relationship. One can't live without the other, that's what that means. So there's a symbiotic relationship between a mother and its baby while it's in the womb, correct? Now, the mother can live without the baby, but the baby can't live without the mother. So it's not quite the same thing, but in a true symbiotic relationship, the one cannot live without the other. We find symbiosis everywhere in nature. There are certain things that this bug cannot exist without this plant, and this plant cannot exist without this bug. This is everywhere in nature. And so it begs the question from an evolutionary perspective, how did these things ever come about? Because this plant cannot exist if this bug did not evolve at the exact same rate that it needed to, at the exact same time to make this symbiotic relationship work. Do you understand what I'm saying here? It makes evolution untenable. Because you have to explain how these two organisms, completely different than one another, all evolved at the same time in the same way and came together. It's a lot like reproduction. At one point, apparently, it was all asexual. Then eventually it moved to sexual reproduction. Well, you need the male parts to evolve at the same time, at the same rate as the female parts, otherwise they just don't make it. But somehow they apparently did in the wonderful world of evolution. They just assumed that all happened in the same way. So this is a really good example of what you'll find in nature. Gears, right? These gears are straight out of nature. I want to talk to you about this. This section right here is from an actual secular peer-reviewed research paper. Remember I talked to you about secular peer review and such? Within the paper itself, you'll find lots of really good information, and then you'll find these assertions and these assumptions that just all of a sudden pop off the page, right? And this is a really good example of that. So I want to show you what's in the secular peer-reviewed research today and what and how they kind of aim it a particular direction. Remember, there is no God. To them, only nature exists. Okay? So since the genetic code was deciphered in the 1960s, scientists have assumed that it was used exclusively to write information about proteins. UW scientists were stunned, go figure, to discover that genomes use the genetic code to write two separate languages. One describes how proteins are made, and the other instructs the cell on how genes are controlled. Don't worry if you don't quite get all of the intricacy of this. Just pay attention to the overarching context of what we're talking about here. One language is written on top of the other, which is why the second language remained hidden for so long. They only saw the one line of language in DNA, and they missed the second line of language that was there, because the one was hiding or masking the second one. Two different, completely different types of information within the genome itself. For over 40 years, we have assumed that DNA changes affecting the genetic code solely impact how proteins are made. Said Snuffleupagus. I'm sure it's Snuffleupagus. Pretty sure it's Snuffleupagus.
Well, that's a very nice one.
Now we know that this basic assumption about reading the human genome missed half of the picture. These new findings highlight that DNA is an incredibly powerful information storage device. Stop. Incredibly powerful information storage device. What else is an incredibly powerful information storage device in the world around us? Like a computer or a hard drive? Right? Do you see how they're using code language? They're talking about computer code, and they're talking about code type language. They're admitting that they know DNA is an incredibly powerful information storage device. How many of you know that we're starting to write information in DNA? We're starting to store pictures of your family on DNA. We can literally write information to DNA.
Wow.
Like you would a hard drive, like you would a USB drive. We're doing it with DNA, right? So they've discovered that it's an information storage device. Well, where do powerful information storage devices come from? Intelligence, right? We have to build them in our world. We have to build computers. We have to build hard drives. They don't just come about because a tornado hit a factory and all of a sudden you get a computer. Wow, that's cool. That's awesome.
Spit right out.
Right, yeah, look, that tornado just built a laptop. That is sweet. Right? That's not how it works. It's intelligently designed, right?
Super ones, how we got
So they admit. Now this is great. So pay attention to what they say in the very next line, right? Which nature has fully exploited in unexpected ways.
I give nature intelligence because you have intelligence to exploit something. Right?
Oh, well, sure. Well, that's true. That's a good point. That's a philosophical point. But notice what I said. Remember how they will never ever look to a supernatural, any kind of supernatural anything, right? Right? They'll never look to an intelligence because, right? It's always nature. Everything's nature. Everything was done by nature. This is the assumptions and the assertions that are built into these papers. They recognize it's an information storage device and then go on to say very quickly which nature has fully exploited in unexpected ways. The new findings highlight that DNA is an incredibly powerful information storage device which the Creator, capital C, has put into our DNA.
No, that's better.
Does that not make more sense?
Yes.
Right? But no. Which nature has fully exploited. How did nature exploit it? How did nature build it? Do you see they don't answer any of those questions?
It takes intelligence to exploit.
That's what he was saying, right? And so nature can't do any of this. It can't build information storage devices. There's no evidence that it can do that. How does it?
Brian,
How does it?
Millions of years, it just happens.
You just after millions of years, you just gotta have faith. So this is so funny. Do you see how they quickly, like they identify that it's an information storage device which is built by intelligence, and quickly say which nature has fully exploited, right? This is what I'm talking about in the secular literature. They know what they're dealing with, and they're like, no God, here's nature, right? They see it, but they don't admit it. The genetic code uses a 64-letter alphabet called codons. Codons, right? Remember we talked about that? Okay, the genetic code uses a 64-letter alphabet. Where do we get alphabets from? Intelligence. So they even admit that it's built on an alphabet. They just admitted that the DNA code is an alphabet, right? And that's what. You look at any language all over the world, and it's always comes back to an intelligence of some sort that built the alphabet, right? The UW team discovered that some codons, which they call duons, can have two meanings. One related to protein sequence, one related to gene control. These two meanings seem to have evolved in concert with one another. See, it's pretty amazing, right?
Convenient.
So pay attention to the highlight. Like these two meanings, like two different languages, it apparently evolved at the same time, in the same way, and were able to communicate with one another and work in conjunction with one another as they were evolving
Separately.
Do you see what I mean? One language was evolving separately from the other, but it just so happened that they evolved in the same way at the same time so that they continued to talk to one another during the entire evolutionary sequence.
They should have had that with the Tower of Babel.
Both to complete a final thing that they both were made to do.
Correct. So then the gene control instructions which come from
Intelligence.
appear to help stabilize certain beneficial features of proteins and how they are made. Gee, interesting. So we have an alphabet, we have instructions, we have language, not just one but two, and they just say nature fully exploited it. These two meanings seem to have evolved, which means we have no clue how that happened. But it was definitely nature. We know it was.
And it was evolution.
It's definitely evolution.
Think if they had put a
Has to be.
sentence in on the bottom of this after all of this, stating that the complete randomness of a Big Bang type theory created all of this.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they run.
Yeah, just the randomness of it.
Contradicting it all the way through.
So these papers clearly understand what they're dealing with, right? They're dealing with information, they're dealing with storage devices, they're dealing with languages, they're dealing with alphabets. They're just throwing intelligence everywhere within these papers, and then they all attribute it to nature. It's always nature, right? So I want you guys to not miss, they understand what's going on, they just refuse to acknowledge it. This is the last one I wanted to show you because I thought it was kind of cool for you people. What I mean by you people is like you people that like enjoy fishing and outdoors and this type of stuff. I think you'll enjoy this, okay? This is pretty cool. So, I am going to skip out of here and I'm going to bring up the actual article because I want you guys to see this. Let's see. This is going to be kind of tough. There. All right, and then here. Yes. And then here. So, this is so cool. All right, so I'll leave you with this. This will be the last thing tonight. Likely source of animals' magnetic sense identified. What does that mean? Well, let's get into the thing and you'll figure it out. Researchers have isolated what are essentially tiny compass needles in the noses of rainbow trout. That may explain these and many other animals' incredible ability to navigate across vast distances. So I want you to think about this. We talk about the salmon and how they go to a particular place to breed. and then those salmon go back downstream, and then they end up coming back upstream. Has anybody ever stopped to think about for a second, how do they know where they're going? They're fish. They're just stupid salmon. Like, how do they actually know where they're going, and then they always end up at the same place? They don't just end up anywhere. And these are fish. They could drop sperm right there. What are you doing? Like, why are you traveling in the first place? These are just stupid fish, right? But no, they end up going to a particular place to breed, right? How do they get there?
They pass up other streams that are feeding into the same river
Yeah.
and ignore those and go to the one.
So
that
you've
they
got
were
this
supposed to.
one direction, you go up this way and then this way, and then you have to go up this way, and then this way, and then this way, and then you end up in your breeding grounds, right? Well, there are multiple little things leading off. They could go up any one of those if they wanted to, and they don't. Tributaries. And they don't. They follow the ones that take them to this particular breeding ground, right?
It's where they were born.
Okay,
Where their
but they're fish. I know where I was born, but how do fish know they were born? I mean, seriously?
Mother Nature
So,
forever.
so how do they get there, right? So,
They got their passport.
so read this here. When cells scraped from the trout's nasal passages were placed in a rotating magnetic field, a clump of tiny iron-rich crystals inside the cells called magnetite, the same mineral used in compass needles, spun in synchrony with the field, turning the cells around with them. So stop and think about what we just read, right? This is how I read these articles, because my brain is like, what? So, cells scraped from the trout's nasal passages were placed in a rotating magnetic field. There's a clump of tiny iron-rich crystals inside the noses of these trout. Somehow they just evolved, I guess? Like they evolved iron-rich, like magnetite in their noses? Like there's metal in the noses that evolved? They evolved metal in their noses? What are we talking about here, right? And so it's the same mineral used in compass needles. So we pull stuff from nature all the time. Most of you don't know, but like the gears on the plant hopper, right? We've been using gears for years, but the plant hopper beat us to it. You already have.
Yeah.
So these same minerals are used. So the strength of the crystal's magnetic response and their firm attachment to the surrounding cell membranes lent strong support for what scientists have long suspected, that these crystals lean back and forth like a sail in response to the Earth's weak magnetic field, and that the cells they are embedded in somehow convey their swaying movements to the brain. This is believed to confer trout and other migratory animals with a magnetic sense by which to judge direction. Once again, magnets in the noses of the fish are being pulled by the electromagnetic field of the Earth. Somehow. So the magnetic field that surrounds our Earth and protects us from the harmful rays of the sun, so all of these harmful rays come in and it hits this magnetic field and they split and they go around the Earth like this so that we don't die because of the radiation coming from the sun. This same magnetic field is also being used by things like trout to kind of push and pull them in a way that drags them to a particular source, right? So the magnets in this nose are what literally lead the fish to whatever and wherever they're supposed to go. Now, how does evolution do that? If evolution only deals with the organism, it only deals with the fish, how do the fish ever become in tune with the Earth's magnetic field? This is what the salmon are doing. The salmon use the same thing.
Yeah, GPS for we did, huh?
Absolutely. They knew how to sail before we knew how to sail. They knew how to navigate before we knew how to navigate. And they did it all on the push and the pull of the Earth's magnetic field, which takes them to certain places. This is what the salmon do. The salmon follow the Earth's magnetic field and they're drugged to a particular place. This is why they don't go down the wrong tributary. But how does evolution evolve metal in the noses of a fish and then put it in tune with something that's external from the organism? Think about that.
Creator.
Right?
The Arctic tern and the hummingbird must have similar
So we not only find this in salmon, we not only find this in trout, rainbow trout, which we have around here, we find it in turtles. Those turtles that always return to the same beaches all the time, you ever trace their migratory route? They go a long ways away. And they always end up back at that same beach laying eggs in the same place. You know how they do it? Magnetic field. The Earth's magnetic field is pulling them back to that same place. Monarch butterflies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right? Monarch butterflies do the same thing. They are born, and they are born over here in this part of the world, and they just know, somehow, how to get back to this particular breeding grounds where their parents were at. They just know how to do this. And we're talking, they're going across continents.
Yeah.
Gulf of Mexico.
They're crossing continents to get there.
Question, do they know or do they just do it?
Well, they just do it, but how would evolution teach them? You know what I mean? Think about this, think about what we're talking about, the creation evolution thing, right? Evolution would say that they evolved the ability to just know how to use the magnetic earth, the magnetic field around the earth. Well, obviously that same thing was now evolved in tortoises and fish and salmon and all kinds of other stuff, right? Or an almighty, all-powerful, supernatural God that cares about all of his creation, not just one little tiny piece of creation, but cares about all of his creation, created these things with the ability to use the Earth's magnetic field to get from point A to point B. It was put into them. In the same way that the DNA was put into us, the correct DNA was put into them. And tortoises can get to the same beach that they always worked off of, and the monarchs don't end up on the same beach that the tortoises do. Think about that. The monarchs end up in a different spot where they need to be, which is more conducive to them breeding. And the salmon don't end up on the same beach that the tortoises do. They end up where they need to end up, where they can better breed. Do you see how God has taken care of all of the organisms on this earth? He's instilled them with all kinds of cool stuff. And we see it in science. I love, love, love these kinds of articles. This is so cool that they've discovered this, right? What I disagree with are the assumptions and the assertions and the conclusions that they come to. At the end of the day, how did these minerals get into the noses of these fish and they locked on to Earth's magnetic field? What did it?
That's why they go back to that same spot, because that's where the magnetite is in that stream.
It must be, right? That's where they snorted it in the first place, and it got stuck in their nose. Right? Yeah. El Chapo fish. Could be. You never know. So, right? So what I'm talking about is I love these kinds of articles, but I don't agree with the conclusions that they end up coming to, right? Their conclusion at the end of all of this is what did it?
Somehow.
Nature did it. Nature did it. Their conclusion is nature did it. And this is what they push on the people that read these articles, right? They just never give the other point of view, the other perspective, right? The other perspective is God created them that way, and that's how they know to get from point A to point B, right?
And that's what people believe.
Magnetite in the noses of the fish that locked on to the electromagnetic field of the Earth. Stop it. Stop it. You didn't evolve that. Stop it. It doesn't even make sense. Anybody with an IQ over 20 knows that. Just a little bit of common sense and an IQ over 20, and you can see that doesn't make sense. That's not how Darwinian evolution works. So I wanted to show you these because these are things that I think we need to be recognizing within the earth, within the world around us, right? We did a review, we've gone over everything, we'll start something new next week, but don't forget to really pay attention to the world around you. We take it for granted. We walk by these beautiful acts of intelligent design every single day, and we just blow it off because we're so spoiled. We're so used to it, right? Think about the intricacy of what God has designed. Think about the beauty of what God has designed. Think about all the ways He takes care of us as humans and all of the ways He takes care of every other creature He created as well. It's amazing what our God has done. Starts with 2 little cells.
No matter what kind of creature it is.
And he holds it all together, right? He's constantly there. He's everywhere, and he holds this whole system together for us, right? It's beautiful. So stop and admire the nature. When you're out in the hills, just admire what's out there. When you see the chipmunks and the squirrels and you think they're really cute, admire what has been built into their intelligence that tells them to start packing away for the winter. Admire the intelligence that's been put into them when they know when to hibernate and when to come out of hibernation. Think about all the small things. Yes?
Was Earth made before or after like all the other planets?
Well, let's go back to Genesis.
Let's go back
Have
to
you ever read Genesis?
No.
Yeah. You should probably read your Bible one of these times. That'd be pretty cool if you did.
You don't have to read very far into it either.
Yeah, that's right, actually.
3 pages.
Yeah, within the first 3 pages, you'd find that answer.
Remember I gave you one?
Yeah. I still have it. It's on my desk.
Okay, hold on. I'll give you the answer. The answer is, that's your homework for next week. You come back and tell me the answer to that question. You have just been given homework. This will be easy homework. Start in Genesis. Start at the beginning of Genesis. You won't have to read very long. And then you come back and you tell me the answer to that question. Okay? That's your homework.